Well, beautiful day here in the Midlands of South Carolina. Mike, what's up, man?
Not much. How we doing, Swanee?
I'm good. How do you like the new studio here that we got rocking and rolling? You
I
like
like
it?
you, man. I like you. Look, you know what it is? You look like one of the coaches, like a head coach, right? You go into the office, they have all the game balls behind them. So I'm not even going to ask what's on those footballs. I can kind of see, but I'm just going to say that Clemson or maybe the previous colleges that you had an impact at gave you those as game balls.
Yeah, let's take a look what we got back here. We got the new Trevor Lawrence. That's brand new out of the box. I don't know if you can see that one. We got the Deshaun Watson. We got the national championship. Look, man, that's when you rack up those titles like Clemson's doing. You get a lot of footballs in the house.
And look, you can see, and your viewers will be able to see. My room's a little bit messy to this side, but I do have some Clemson gear. So for people that say I don't have Clemson, see, I got Clemson. Everyone that says I hate Clemson, I don't hate Clemson. I got a Clemson bobblehead actually right above me. See, I'm neutral. I promise. Even though I work in Columbia.
Yeah, don't let the Gamecocks beat you down with that Clemson stuff over there on the side, man. All right, Mike, let's talk about it today. They're calling it historic. I don't know if it is historic. A partnership between the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. I just spoke to some of my contacts out in Oregon. We had them on to talk about what it means to them. And I certainly see the advantages from the Pac-12. I mean, it's a league that's only been in the college football playoff twice. The last time it was there was back in 2017, so it's been a while. But what are the benefits for the Big Ten and the ACC in something like this, in your opinion?
Well, the instant thing that comes to my mind is the idea that the strength of schedule will be stronger, and not just the strength of schedule, but it'll also increase revenue with the ratings for some of these games. It'll be able to give some more marquee matchups. And when you're talking about from a TV standpoint, when you're talking about trying to be able to get eyeballs, that's what you need. I'm sorry. Shoot, let's pick on some schools here. Let's get some people really upset. Let's go out West Coast. I don't know.
Arizona State.
Arizona State versus Purdue. Is that going to really move the needle? Sorry to our boy Maddie over, who comes a great Clemson. But the point being is that going to really move the needle? Probably not. So what you need to do is you got to find ways to be able to move the needle, and being able to have matchups that you can kind of pick and put in more of a primetime spot and be able to give people what they really want is going to be great. But it's also, now that we live in the world of NIL and players being able to make a quick buck here and there, now they also are going to be able to benefit, because that is one of the big difference right now. If this happened, I don't know, say 10 years ago, would this be as important to have happen? I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be, but it wouldn't be as important, because now as a conference, you need to find ways to be able to get players to still want to come to your conference. It is so easy right now from an SEC standpoint. I mean, Shane Beamer talked about it maybe a month ago, before the deal was finalized between Texas and Oklahoma, saying, before it's like, hey, you want to play in the best conference, come play in the best conference. But now we have Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, that's the ultimate mic drop. That was his exact quote. So I think what you've seen now is you have to do this if you want to be able to make some money, number one. But number two, to be able to convince some of these players, hey, you have an opportunity to make money. You don't have to necessarily just go to the SEC.
The other thing, too, and I think this is why, to me, and again, we've had a little while to digest it, but it doesn't seem like such a slap in the face that this is taking place. Not in a bad way, but just so shocking. Is because how many years did we hear people talking about, and this is still out there, about the Power 5 leagues coming together with a commissioner to break away from the remaining parts of the NCAA so that these guys could benefit off of NIL, a change we have seen, maybe have control of their own playoffs. I mean, things like that. So it's really 3 out of the 5, and at this point, 3 out of the 4, because it certainly seems like the Big 12 is on shaky ground. But, I mean, is that another reason that maybe it's not as, quote, stunning today that this news is finally coming to fruition?
It's not. In Swanee, I think here's the thing that's interesting, though. I want to say the year was 2012 when the Big 10 and the Pac-12 actually tried to create an alliance of their own. They try to be able to beef up their schedule. And I mention this because while this is basically a handshake, because that's all it is, nothing is written, nothing is done yet. They try to make that happen back in 2012. And the discussions, unfortunately, eventually fell apart back then. And it was reported that it would have taken at least 5 years for those non-conference games to come to fruition because of the TV deal. So I mention all that because, obviously it's going to take some time with Texas and Oklahoma. I think that will be quicker, though, in comparison to what any type of alliance talk outside of the SEC. But it's important to keep in mind because this is not a deal, regardless if they sign papers and, it's not going to happen overnight. People need to keep that in mind. So I think the big thing is that, yes, it will benefit all three conferences in some shape, way, or form. It will benefit some teams a little bit more than others. But at the same time, too, until we actually see this in writing, until this actually happens, it's going to be playing catch up for a lot of these teams in these other conferences outside of the SEC.
Again, he's on Twitter at Mike_UVA. Watch Fox 57 in the Midlands. Mike Uva with us every Tuesday afternoon. The other thing, too, and I posed this question to our buddy Jared over at scoopduck.com, and I even kind of broached it here as well, but it really does feel like from the Pac-12's perspective, this is a big benefit because they get a chance to lock in more East Coast start times. And conversely, the teams from the Big Ten and the ACC, if they were to go out west, those could always be like 4 o'clock West Coast or 5 o'clock West Coast start times and still get perfectly good spots on the East Coast as well.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is going to be probably the biggest challenge outside of the actual matchups. I guess you could say, obviously, traveling and this and that. But, I mean, let's look at it, right? Right now, if you have to pick who is some of the top teams in the ACC, I mean, that's pretty easy, right? Obviously Notre Dame, that was last year, so I'm not going to throw them in the mix if that were to happen because I know that's a possibility in the next couple of years. But we'll put Notre Dame to the side. Clemson, North Carolina, Miami, some of these teams, and obviously we can add more to it. The point being is, those are 3 teams right now that just pop in my head instantly. Does that mean 5 years, 10 years from now, they will be in the same position that they are right now? I mean, we saw Miami take their hits. Yes, Miami was in the mix to be able to compete with Clemson in conference championships, and Clemson, of course, took care of them. But the point being is we're looking 5 years out potentially. This is just the example I'm using because of what we saw a couple of years ago, 2012, with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. How do you line that up? And do you bet teams that are a little bit better to give them some of the better matchups? Because we know if it's Clemson and you're going up against, let's say, Oregon, that could help out those 2 teams more than if you are a team that's in the bottom part of the conferences, for the Pac-12 and the ACC. So I'm interested to see how it all aligns out because what's going to happen is, does this become a rich gets richer situation and we benefit and we give the benefit of the doubt to the teams that are better in the conference over the last couple of years? Or do we try to lay this all out so it can be fair? Because I have a feeling some of these athletic directors in these other, in these conferences outside of schools like Clemson and Oregon, some of the lower tier teams in the conference, they're not going to be too happy if the rich just keep getting richer. So I mentioned that. And I think the other thing too, that goes without saying, this, of course, is football driven, but this will have a huge impact on all the college sports. So the biggest change we will see will definitely be football, though, and the most money that this will impact will be football.
One of the other things, Mike, that's interesting to me are the conversations about the Rose Bowl. And this wasn't, I don't think, addressed today, but the Rose Bowl with the college football playoff expansion, it sort of wants to get out. It's wild, right? Like most bowls would say, like the TaxSlayer.com bowl would say, sign us up for being in the college football playoff. But the Rose Bowl may be bigger than the college football playoff, just in terms of what it could still bolster if it had the winner of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 facing off and the historical side of that. But, is that a bad move for the Rose Bowl if indeed it does step out, or can it stand alone, almost like a Notre Dame of the bowl, a Notre Dame of the bowls per se?
I think it can stand alone, and here's why. If the competition remains high, people will watch that game for 2 reasons. One, people enjoy watching football on New Year's Day. I mean, that will never, ever, ever change. I mean, think about it. Go back to some of the most historic games in college football history. Doesn't necessarily have to be the national championship. I mean, shoot, you can just think from a USC standpoint. One of the most memorable plays in bowl history happened in the Outback Bowl, right, on New Year's Day. So the point being, with Clowney's obviously his big hit against Michigan. So the point being is some of those best memories do happen on that day, and the history that the Rose Bowl has with all the ongoing changes that we've seen these last couple of years with college sports and the impact it's had on New Year's Day 6 bowl games, the Rose Bowl continues to be a game that people really enjoy. I mean, shoot, I have conversations with people all the time. If you could pick one bowl game that you want to attend just on your bucket list, the Rose Bowl's there. It doesn't matter what school. Yeah, I know you're raising your hand. I'm right there with you. It doesn't matter who's playing in it. I've given a lot of publicity over these last couple of weeks to TikTok Tech, but I mean, TikTok Tech could be playing in it. It doesn't matter. People want to go out there. So I think the beauty of this is, because of those automatic bowl tie-ins and the automatic bids that you do have, and obviously it's changed over the last couple of years because of how the college football playoff has had an impact on it. To have new teams in there and to potentially have, not necessarily two conferences automatically locked in every year. I mean, you could have a team maybe from the ACC. I mean, you imagine that. Let's say Clemson isn't playing for the college football playoff one year, but yet they're still one of the best teams in the country and they have a chance to play in the Rose Bowl. I feel like a lot of Tiger fans would probably want to go to that. I mean, that's a neat bowl game, just new opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing about that, though, is I personally believe because of the way the college football playoff has been working, where Clemson's been in the Sugar Bowl, they've been in the Orange Bowl, they've been in the Cotton Bowl, they've been in the Fiesta Bowl. Even if they had, maybe been to the Rose Bowl, I still think it would have that punch. But it's really got that punch because they haven't been there. They haven't been to that one. So I think that's it. Or Chick-fil-A. Like Clemson hadn't played in the Peach Bowl because Alabama always ends up in the Chick-fil-A Bowl if they're, ahead of Clemson. So it's just kind of one of those, I guess, dynamics of it all. But no doubt, man, I think the Rose Bowl will be packed with Tiger fans. All right, so you didn't join us to talk about Clemson. You didn't join us to talk about the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. You joined us to talk about South Carolina, the SEC. Some would say maybe even the pulse of college football runs through the SEC. South Carolina situation at quarterback. I think it was last week you were telling us about a grad assistant that was stepping in. What's the latest with the Luke Doty situation as he's trying to mend from that foot sprain we talked about a week ago?
So as we reported almost 2 weeks ago now, we were the first to report that Luke Doty initial diagnosis was a midfoot fracture and he had minor ligament damages. Shane Beamer came out later that day and said it was a sprained foot, fortunately, the second diagnosis, and they came out just this past Thursday during the Carolina Calls coaching show and said that initially they believed that it was worse than what they eventually saw it to be, and they thought he was going to be done for the season. So that's the good news. That comes out, and I'm glad Beamer said that because I'm sure some people are like, wait a minute, how can, not just myself, but some of the other credible outlets in Columbia say that same thing. So that's what happened. That cast that Doty has had on over the last about week and a half now, that came off on Sunday. He is in a walking boot. He's not putting really any pressure on it right now, but he does come out a little bit occasionally. Right now, Zeb Nolan, which sounds like a Disney movie, the grad assistant from North Dakota State who played behind Trey Lance, yes, he is officially on the roster as of today. He's wearing number 25. I can't remember the last SEC quarterback to wear a number in the 20s, probably the hefty lefty at Kentucky. I know Doug Flutie was in the 20s back in his days at Boston College, but it's not something that you see too much. He is on the roster. Shane Beamer said today that he is not named a starter for two reasons. One, he doesn't think that's fair to Zeb because Zeb's only had 4 days of practice, really, since all this stuff is kind of played out. And number two, he also wants to see how things play out with Luke Doty. With that all being said, Jason Brown, the transfer from St. Francis that has come in as a grad transfer, he has continued to find ways to separate himself a little bit more from the true freshman Colton Gauthier. And now it seems like it's going to be a decision that's going to be coming down between Zeb Nolan and Jason Brown if Doty is not ready to go week one.
Well, and I would guess the other thing too, at least from the South Carolina perspective, is the fact that you've got this matchup with Eastern Illinois out of the gate, which, again, I'm not saying, look, you don't have to be at full bore to come out on top and get a victory in that game. But, when you're looking at your schedule and that's the opener, there is a sense of relief when you're dealing with an issue like this, correct? I mean, there's got to be.
Yeah.
Shane Beamer can't say that. But, I mean, there's got to be a little bit of relief in that front.
And Shane came out today and he said, look, he's like, this isn't, just coaches talk. He's like, I feel confident and comfortable where we are right now with quarterback based on what has transpired over the almost 2 weeks now, the week and a half. Zeb Nolan is a guy that has experience of playing in Power 5 football. He was at Iowa State. He actually gave a tremendous game up and back, up back and forth, kind of like a track meet style game when he played against Oklahoma back in the day when Shane Beamer was an assistant over there. So there's experience there. And Marcus Satterfield came out and said before, during the interview process when Zeb came over as a grad assistant, he told Beamer, he's like, he might be the smartest quarterback I've ever spoke to. So the IQ is there. There's no question about it. Zeb joked around today and he said, I did an old man workout this summer. I wasn't planning I was going to play football. I thought my last game against Sam Houston, that was going to be it. But he's back in the pads again. He's getting that body acclimated back to being in football shape. But he knows what he's doing. The guy has an absolute cannon for an arm, and he's been pushing Jason Brown. He's been pushing, Colton Gauthier. He's making these guys better. And to be able to have just that added depth, whether or not Zeb Nolan is playing on, week one or, he's on the field at any point this season, he's definitely adding more pressure into that competition, into that quarterback room, but he also brings an IQ because he's been around Trey Lance. He was been able to learn from a guy that is making a bunch of money right now in the NFL and is giving Jimmy Garoppolo a run for his money in San Francisco.
Mike, final thing for you today, and I guess this all, when we get right down to it, sort of shakes out to the beginning of the year and everything that we know about college football, but it's such an aerial game. I mean, and when you and I were growing up, it really wasn't. It was a ground and pound, 3 yards out of the dusk. South Carolina secondary, what's the expectation there? Where do you think they are as they begin to head into the preparation for the season opener?
I think it's starting to come together in terms of who will be the starters. I think that will be a little bit clearer after this week. I will say, though, they've gone through some musical chairs just these last couple of weeks. Going into training camp. Karan Prunty comes in, the All-American defensive back from Kansas, and then, he's there for a cup of coffee and he's gone. Cam Smith coming back for his third year, a local guy here at Westwood. He's been in a boot all preseason. So there's still some question marks to be answered at the secondary. I know I've mentioned Carlins Patel and the difference he's made, but even Beamer mentioned today, they have so many young guys or guys that have come from smaller schools. They're not used to playing in front of 80,000 plus. So, being able to put a roster together right now, that could change as the season goes on, as you could say any school, but until they're actually out on the field, how do they react to an environment like that? Even guys that were here last year because of the restrictions, because of COVID, some of these guys have not played in front of big crowds. So there's a lot of question marks still to be answered about that secondary. And we're going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, not just week one, but as the season unfolds.
Well, and if that defensive line with Jordan Birch and others, can make an impact, that'll help those guys on the back end for sure. As you know, as a former player. Mike, buddy, always appreciate you, my man.
Thanks, Wani.
Hey, tell those Gamecocks to be nice to me. I treat them right.
I'll see if I can get them to send you Christmas cards this winter.
That would be great. All right, buddy, be good. Mike Uva, Watch Fox.